Hey, welcome everybody to the Stadium Journey podcast. Thanks for joining us this evening. We're going to jump right into it. I'm going to start with the starting lineups because, that's what PA announcers do. So the gang's all here tonight. Dave Cotney's here. Follow him at ProFan9. Mark Viquez is on the internet at Ballpark Hunter. The above average comedian Dan Colachico's here. Follow him at DanLaw83. And I'm Paul Baker. You could follow me at PuckmanRI. Tonight we are really excited to be welcoming Neil deMause to the podcast. See, I got your name right, and then I messed up the words after it.
You're on the podcast. Welcome to the podcast.
The podcast. This is now a podcast.
Podcast.
Among other things, Neil is the co-author of one of this podcast's favorite books. Now I can't say the word podcast. One of our favorite books that we've referenced many times on this podcast, Field of Schemes, and also takes care of the website and the Twitter account, fieldofschemes.com, and follow him on Twitter and all that good stuff. Neil, thanks for joining us tonight. Welcome.
Glad to be here. Always happy to be on a podcast.
Podcast.
Yeah.
Peatcast, Paulcast.
Can you believe that Dan let that slide and he didn't even say pork roll? I thought it, and I was like, no, we're going to be professional.
Too early.
I'm going to be professional. We just started. I'm not going to do it. And then you just had to do it.
Yep.
Is that the first time that Dave has brought up pork roll?
It could be.
No, he's done it before.
It only took 7 years.
No, it's not. He's done it before. And then he gets mad after we've gone on for 5 minutes.
All right. Like now, for instance.
Yeah, like now.
All right. So let's get. We have a guest here, gentlemen.
Okay.
So Neil, can you explain to our listeners? The panel is all very familiar with Field of Schemes and what that's all about. Can you explain a little bit about that to our listeners who may not be so familiar?
Yeah, sure. So the really short version of the story is back in 1995 when the Cleveland Browns were moving to Baltimore to become the Ravens, and the city of Cleveland was talking about getting a new stadium to get a new Browns team. And at the same time, the Yankees were talking about wanting a new stadium in Manhattan. Both the city of Cleveland and the city of New York were in the middle of huge budget cuts. And so my co-author and I, Joanna Kagan, who were friends on a little magazine in Brooklyn, we're like, oh, this is a cute little story. Cleveland and New York, two cities that have the same thing going on. And, what a coincidence. We could write 1,000 words on this. And then we started researching it, and it turned into, thousands and thousands of words in a bunch of different articles. And then eventually a book called Field of Schemes, which looks at the economics, the politics, everything about stadium deals. And because we were like, hey, there's this new thing called the web. We can actually update it, on the internet. So we started doing, little posts there, mostly me, because at that point, Joanna was like, you go ahead and do this. So we ended up doing that, and, it turned into another edition of the book. And, it still goes on, gets updated on the website, pretty much every day I'm posting something about something, because somehow, again, despite the fact that we're almost 30 years later now, we still are in the same boat where it seems like there's constantly team owners demanding new stadiums and demanding public money for them. And, the same arguments are still going on. So I feel like I still have to be out there responding to them and covering them. So that's the really short version of it. The long version, I'm sure we can get to.
Yeah, it's amazing how the issues just jump from city to city, and the names have been changed, but the script pretty much stays the same. Dave and I were talking before you came on. Like, all right, so what are we going to talk about with Neil when he comes on? And Dave we could talk about this place and this place and this place and this place right down those. So since Dave's wearing an Oakland A's hat, why don't we start with the situation in Oakland then?
Yeah. So I mean, obviously this has been going on for well over a decade at this point, right? They were going to move to Fremont. They were going to move various different places in Oakland. Now we're in this situation where they're supposedly maybe moving to Las Vegas, which it seems like John Fisher just sort of stumbled into. 1 minute he was negotiating with Oakland about trying to get I forget, it was going to be $700-800 million, something like that, in public money towards building a new stadium and development at Howard Terminal. And then the next minute it was Dave Cavall saying, we're totally focused on Las Vegas. Mayor of Oakland said, okay, fine, don't talk to us anymore. And then it's like, oh, okay, Las Vegas, we're all in on Las Vegas. They went out, they got $600 million in public money. That's still not enough to build a dome stadium in Las Vegas. And that's where we stand, right? That was last June. And now they've gotten approval to move. They don't actually have a stadium. They don't actually have financing for a stadium. They don't actually have a place to play for the 3 years it would take to build a stadium. They announced in December that they were going to have renderings of the stadium, and then they still haven't actually come out with those. So it's super weird. But it's not all that out of the ordinary, I guess, or unexpected for a situation that again seems like it was something that Fisher more stumbled into than really had a plan for.
Did I read somewhere too that there's now speculation that the site that they have earmarked, which is where I think the Tropicana is, and right behind the MGM or whatever, that it's really not big enough a footprint for a stadium?
That was clear kind of up front, even though they weren't saying it. It's 9 acres, and 9 acres is like, Wrigley Field size, right? You could build a baseball field and stands around it for that. But, nobody wants to spend $1 billion building Wrigley Field in the middle of Las Vegas in the year 2024, right? So especially if you have to build a dome, which they have to because it's Las Vegas and it's hot, they're not going to be able to fit that on that property. And people were saying up front, how is that even going to work? And they came out with these renderings last June that didn't make a whole lot of sense. And then they said, oh, no, those aren't the real renderings. And we're still waiting to see how it's going to work. But again, this they could switch to a different site. There's been some talk of, well, maybe we can build over the land next door, which is going to be used right by the owner of the rest of the site, even though it won't be for the stadium. So maybe the roof can kind of go. I have no idea. I don't think anybody has any idea how it's going to work. And this is why it's become such a big deal of waiting for these renderings, which normally you don't really care that much about, right? Because they never really look like what the final product does. But again, the beginning of December, they were supposed to be out and they said, oh, we're going to postpone this in honor, in memory of these state troopers who died over the weekend. And then, they've been memorialized now for 2 months now and still nothing. And the latest was Fisher was saying, oh, well, hopefully by the end of February. But it's a little bit, concerning isn't quite the right word because, clearly it's not like they don't have some renderings or some idea of what they want. I think they're just biding their time until when they think it will, be in their best interest to reveal whatever it is they have to reveal. Might be a Friday at like 6 o'clock in the afternoon or something like that when they're like, or the middle of the Super Bowl. That might be a good time for them to announce it when hopefully no one will be paying attention.
So I see a lot of similarities between the Oakland situation and that of the Arizona Coyotes, in that it almost seems like I'm sure you've seen this where it's almost like a poker game, like this whole owners trying to get money and they're bluffing that they're going to move, or are they really going to move? Are they not going to move? And that's a whole big part of it. But it just seems like the Oakland Athletics have gone like all in. Yep, we're all in Vegas. Well before all the chips have been laid and all the cards are shown, and it seems like the Coyotes are the same. Well, we're all in Arizona. We're all into staying in the state, even if we have to play and lose our shirts on a 4,500 seat arena. Like, it just seems to me like they've really not followed the path of those who've been really successful in getting what they want from their respective governments.
Meaning to play off different governments against each other, right?
Yeah.
And you want to say, well, we could be going here, we could be going there, but we haven't decided yet. Yeah, I don't think either of them those owners have handled it very well. But the nice thing about being a sports team owner is you don't have to, right? I'm trying to think of a good example, but there have certainly been teams that have, I mean, geez, look at the Washington Nationals, right? Who spent years when they were the Expos, Major League Baseball was shopping around and trying to figure out, are they going to move to Portland, Oregon? Are they going to move to, somebody wanted
Puerto Rico,
stadium, right? Puerto Rico, Hartford, Connecticut, right? Everything was on the table, right? We're going to get a real bidding war going. There was no bidding war, right? I mean, nobody really offered anything except for DC. But the lesson here is you only need one, local government that is willing to play ball, right? And they ended up getting exactly what they wanted. I think that Fisher got what he's asking for from Las Vegas. The weird thing is that he didn't really ask for enough to cover all of his costs. We think, it's really hard to tell, but the guy clearly is not a business genius. He runs the Oakland A's after all. So I'm not sure, I guess there's probably a world in which he's playing, nine-dimensional chess and he's got all this planned out, but I don't think so. I mean, I think this is really that he was trying to play off Las Vegas against Oakland. And again, sort of fell into, well, okay, we're all in on Las Vegas, and was able to get money out of the state of Nevada regardless. But again, that's still not where he needs to be. Now he's like, well, it's only $1 billion. My family has $1 billion. Yeah, sure. Your family got $1 billion by not giving it to you to spend on a stadium that's not going to make back $1 billion. So I'm really, really curious to see where this goes. I mean, I think a lot of people have been saying 50-50 as to whether they move to Vegas, or 40-60. And I mean, I don't know. I'm not good at setting betting lines, but that's probably somewhere reasonable. I would be willing to bet either side on those lines.
Or is this just a case of Major League Baseball just wants Vegas and they're going to shoehorn it?
Oh God. No.
One way or the other.
I don't think Major League Baseball wants Vegas at all. Vegas is a tiny, tiny market. I think Major League Baseball really wants the A's situation to be settled, right? The A's and the Rays have been dragging on forever. Because, in Tampa Bay, Stu Sternberg has had his own situation where, he has also played it very poorly. Oh, we're going to ask for a new stadium in Tampa Bay and a new one in Montreal. That'll go well. And, baseball has been saying to all the owners who are looking at the expansion fees for other sports, because, baseball hasn't expanded since 1998. And they're looking at the expansion fees and they're like, when are we going to get some of that? And he's like, no, don't worry. We can't do it yet because, the A's and the Rays need to have, Charlotte and Portland and Las Vegas and all those cities to threaten to move to. But once they're settled, then, we're going to cash in. So I think they really want that to be resolved. I do not think that anybody wants Las Vegas as a baseball market, especially not with John Fisher there. Because, I mean, he's already said that his intent is to go there, be a small market, and keep on collecting the revenue sharing checks that he's been getting in Oakland. So, the owners of the big market teams are not particularly going to be happy to hear that. But, again, the idea is, well, we'll suck it up and we'll deal with whatever it is, as long as we get those, a couple $2 billion checks for expansion franchises. But, that first they have to resolve this. And I think they thought it was going to be resolved by now.
Fascinating. So that still leaves now Oakland without anywhere to play.
I mean, they have options. They could play in Oakland if they want to go, back to the mayor of Oakland and say, okay, fine, we'll agree to something. They could probably try to rent from the Giants, although that would almost certainly go poorly. They could play in any number of minor league stadiums like Sacramento or Salt Lake City or Vegas or, all sorts of different places. But, unless they don't, it's a problem, right? You don't want to go to Vegas and be playing in the minor league stadium for the first 3 years, because that's when you're going to get the big boost from people really interested in seeing the team, right? By the time you open the stadium, everyone will have 3 years of watching the A's and will not want to go to the ballpark. So that doesn't really work. And if you play somewhere else for 3 years, I mean, are people again in Utah or Sacramento going to be excited about having the A's there as sort of a temporary franchise? At least when the Hornets were in Oklahoma City for a year, that was sort of seen as like a, trial run
A
for
tryout, yeah.
right, yeah. So, I guess maybe you could try and sell that in Utah, but I don't know. I mean, it seems like there's not a lot of upside here for the A's, for Major League Baseball, for John Fisher, but he's caught the car and needs to figure out what to do with it.
What incentive would the city of Oakland have to do anything for the A's? Like,
Well,
why would they? Why? I mean, there was the story about how they had an independent league team that was going to play in Oakland, and they wanted to play in the Coliseum, and then the A's said no.
The Ballers.
I mean, if I'm the mayor of Oakland, I might just suddenly decide that there needs to be some road construction right outside the Coliseum that's just going to hinder traffic even more.
I mean, they can just say no. I mean, the Coliseum, the A's lease on the Coliseum runs out at the end of the year, and the city still owns half of the Coliseum, so they can just say, "Okay, sorry, you're done." I think the mayor has said that she wants to retain the team name and to be promised an expansion franchise, which, sure, that's a reasonable ask. The problem is then what happens when you say, "Okay, we've been promising expansion franchise," and then Major League Baseball says, "Okay, you got to find somebody who wants to spend $2 billion on expansion franchise, and you need to build a stadium before this thing happens." So, I mean, I think that would be the only reason to go along with it. She could also certainly try to leverage it into, look, you guys don't have a place to play. You want to expand. Why don't you just, give John Fisher an expansion franchise and have him sell the team to somebody in Oakland? There is some leverage yet that she could play. But of course, it all depends on, how antsy the other owners are about having to deal with this A's situation for the next 3 or more years. And if they are really, at a point where they, obviously they're not going to say in public, right? Because you don't want to undermine your fellow owners, because someday you might need them to do the same for you when you're threatening to move somewhere. It's hard to know exactly how much you can extract from baseball, because we don't know how scared they are of, having to deal with the situation that John Fisher has laid out for them.
Well, I mean, they're Major League Baseball is busy in that they have to approve the sale of the Orioles, which, I mean, for me, not really following what the Orioles are doing day to day, seem to come out of nowhere. But yeah. I did hear an interview where the local officials who have just ponied up a big chunk of dough for renovations to Camden are not overly pleased, because this was not the way this was presented. It was not presented that, the Angelos family was going to try and get out as soon as possible. And the reality is that, that deal with the city changes the sale of the team, because that team is not nearly as valuable without this commitment in place from the city of Baltimore to do whatever upgrades they need in Baltimore, which I have no idea what that could possibly be. More Mark Viquez social areas, maybe, but
yeah, it's at least $600 million that Maryland has committed. Plus, they've committed to, basically, the Orioles' new owner now can get out of the lease early if there isn't an agreement within, I think, 10 years on a development of the area around Camden Yards that the Orioles would get to do. So yeah, I mean, it makes the franchise much, much more valuable, obviously. And, the one condition that Baltimore and Maryland officials put on it was, okay, well, you're not going to turn around and sell the team, right? And John Angelo said, no, absolutely, we're not talking about selling the team, because there was a report that they were going to sell it in December. So that day, Maryland officials went to him, I think it was the state treasurer, and said, you're not going to sell it, are you? He's like, no, we're not looking to sell it. And then as soon as the deal was done, he announced that they were selling the team to the exact guy who had been in the paper as being looking into buying the team. So yeah, I mean, I don't know how much of a difference really it makes to Maryland, right? Because they're spending the money either way, but it certainly is, a thumb in the eye to just straight up lie to elected officials about it. But what are you going to do? The thing's signed now, right? I mean,
well, the fans are happy. I mean, they didn't like the Angelos family to begin with. So, well,
sure.
I mean, I guess they did way back in the 80s when they bought them and kept them in Baltimore. But Peter Angelos being, meddling and kind of on the cheap, and a lot of years of some really crappy Orioles baseball. And, what's the one constant? Well, it's the ownership. So,
I mean, be careful what you wish for. Nobody liked the CBS ownership era of the Yankees either. And then people were really happy when that guy George Steinbrenner was going to buy them.
So when you were talking just now about the Orioles selling, it kind of sparked a story in my head that I haven't really heard how it sort of played out, and maybe you'll agree with me, maybe not, I don't know, but to me the worst example of the government just bending over backwards to a team owner and it not working is the story of the Florida / Miami Marlins, who, for years were building a new ballpark. Finally they tore down the Orange Bowl. They built the ballpark. They of course, after they got the ballpark, they did everything possible wrong. They spent $1 gazillion on payroll, and then, they didn't get the results right away. And the very next year, they just went from, a mid to upper range payroll team to like one of the bottom. And then probably the exclamation point is that Jeffrey Loria, who I still say is the worst owner in the history of sports ever, maybe some of those dudes in the 20s were a little worse, but I don't know. But he ended up selling the team, and then there was a rider in the agreement or something like that said the city of Miami would get a chunk of whatever appreciation there was. And then the accountants got fancy and basically said, oh, well, we didn't make any money. And then, of course, the city of Miami is trying to sue him and whatnot. First of all, do you agree that this is the worst case that we've seen? And second of all, do you know where this story is at right now, or is it done? Or,
I mean, so people are constantly asking me, what's the worst stadium deal ever? And my pat answer is always that every unhappy stadium deal is unhappy in its own way. There are plenty of awful ones, right? I mean, look at the White Sox, right? Who, spent all this money in Illinois to build a new stadium that was supposed to be, a modern, better version of Comiskey Park, and got something that everybody hated and had to spend money to renovate it. And now it looks like they're demanding another new stadium. Or the Pittsburgh Pirates, right? Oh, when we get a new stadium, it's going to be, the Pirates are suddenly going to be back to the glory days, and the stadium's gorgeous. The Pirates are still awful, if not worse. So, there are plenty of bad examples. I mean, I could Indiana Pacers constantly getting more money every 5 years to renovate. But yeah, the Marlins are up there, right? I mean, just the fact that it was almost $1 billion, the fact that it was, it's a stadium that, despite the fact that it was replacing a stadium that nobody liked for baseball in the first place, I think maybe even fewer people like the new one. The fact that the team was good for about, a week and a half after they built it, and then immediately thereafter,
first month,
said, oh no, we're not in first place at the end of April, let's sell everybody, and took like the entire team and shipped it off to Toronto for Danny Hechavarria, I want to say. So that was all awful. Right, exactly the thing with where they were supposed to get a cut of the money when it was sold, and that they're fighting over that. The one thing I would add is the fact that they finally, since they took them 10 years to fight over this thing, when they finally were ready to do it, it was right at the height of the economic crisis, and interest rates were through the roof. So they ended up having to do a really terrible loan deal or bond deal on the stadium. So it's costing Miami like, I don't know, an extra $300 million or something like that over what it should have in the first place. There's not a lot of real upside there. You know, I mean, I guess if eventually the Marlins win a World Series and people are happy about it, but that's not going to be because of the stadium, right? I mean, the Marlins won 2 World Series somehow in the old stadium. And you know, so that's I don't see a way that it turns out to be a happy ending at all, or even a partly happy ending. I guess Miami's going to be underwater another 15 years anyway, so maybe it doesn't matter.
That could be too. So on the flip side, then, do you have an example where, you know, they really did it right? They had a bad stadium that really needed replacing, and you know, the owners worked well with the government, and it was smooth and no problem and no threats. And is there an example of that, or are they all just nightmares?
Just baseball or all sports?
Anything.
I mean, there are some better ones, right? I mean, the Warriors just built a new arena in San Francisco, and that seemed to go pretty smoothly as things go. And it's mostly private money. That was a specific situation, obviously, because there was no real arena in San Francisco except for the Cow Palace. So, you know, it was a wide open market, and you could afford to, you'd make a lot of money back, right? You can spend $1 billion on an arena there and probably make that back. Orlando's soccer stadium was pretty good in terms of using very little public money, and that went pretty smoothly. There's a handful here and there. Like the Giants was not smooth at all. They threatened to move to San Jose. They threatened to move to Tampa Bay, but eventually Peter McGowan stepped in and agreed to build it with, again, mostly private money, and that worked out pretty well. It's a good location. It's a nice stadium.
They were moving to Toronto.
they were in Toronto in the 70s. That was a whole previous iteration, right? That was back in the I don't know if any of you guys had cards from the Topps 1974 series, but that was when the Padres were talking to
Nationals, Washington
D.C. So I've got my Johnny Grubb, I think it is. I have a Johnny Grubb card that says Washington NL on it.
Yeah, Willie McCovey has one.
I have the Willie McCovey one.
You have the McCovey one? Yeah, yours is worth a lot more than mine.
No, not in the shape.
Johnny Grubb didn't have the greatest career. Anyway, so that's not bad. And I think what you saw happen in Seattle with the arena for the Kraken was interesting, because Seattle had really had their heads handed to them with the deals for the Seahawks and the Mariners, and actually passed a law by referendum saying that the city had to get back a return on its investment for any stadium or arena deal. It turned out to be not that enforceable, but it sort of set the standard to the point where, when they were negotiating to talk about redoing the arena, it was like, well, we're not going to do this with a ton of public money. So they managed to get away with it there. So there are examples here and there, but they are, absolutely the, exceptions to prove the rule, because there's, it's standard at this point to be asking for hundreds of millions of dollars, if not billions of dollars, for a stadium or an arena. And the numbers just go up. It was only last year, right, that the Bills got their stadium. And I think that was the first $1 billion subsidy, or $1 billion, cost subsidy. And right after that, you had the Titans and you had the Orioles and the Ravens. And now we're talking about the White Sox, and it could be $1.7 billion when all is said and done. And again, it's just, if you would ask me when we first were working on this book, I remember Joanna and I talking about, man, this sure is a weird moment in history, that we happen to have caught this trend in the 90s. 25 years from now, we'll look it back at it and we'll be like, wow, that was sure a strange moment that we happened to write a book about the time when sports teams were demanding all this public money. I would not have thought that I would still be here having the exact same conversations in the third decade of the 21st century. I assumed that we would, be on to talking about, the space wars or something.
Yeah. No, no. So you may have just answered this question a little bit, Neil, but I want to ask it anyway. So can you think of any examples where a city has stood up to a team and come out on the winning side? They say, no, we're not giving you hundreds of millions of dollars in subsidies.
Sure. So Seattle was an example. San Francisco with the Giants, they voted it down 4 times and between San Francisco and San Jose, and they wound up getting to keep the team. Places, let's see where they kept the team. Boston with the Red Sox. There was a big battle over replacing Fenway Park, and they stood up to them, and eventually the previous owner sold to John Henry, who was like, oh yeah, sure, I can make more money off of that than off of Fenway, a redone Fenway, than off of a fake new Fenway across the street. There's probably a few more. I'm trying to think of any place that really where they just caved and said, the problem is, and this is the problem with all these fights, is that if you're this, let's take an example like Minneapolis, right? Minneapolis was the absolute poster child for years because they kept saying no to the Twins and the Vikings. They were playing in the Metrodome, hated the Metrodome, not even so much because it was the Metrodome, but because they had agreed to a deal that actually paid back the cost of building the thing with parking revenues and ad board revenues and things like that. So they didn't have a great lease. They had to give up a share of that to the county or the state. I forget which it was. So they kept coming back and saying, we need new places, need new places. And the state legislature kept saying, no, 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 no. The problem with this is that if you are a sports team owner, you don't need to have a very good batting average, right? You just need to be batting over 0. So the 10th time that the Twins went back, they still had the state saying no. They still had the city saying no, but the county was 7 people on the county commission, and 4 of them were willing to say yes. So they got the county commission's approval, and then they still needed the state legislature's approval to let the county raise taxes because they had control over that. And they were able to say to the state legislature, okay, we will approve it since it's not our money. And because I later afterwards talked to one of the main state senators who had been opposed to all this stuff and said, what happened, John? You guys were holding the line so well. And he said, they wore us down, man. The lobbyists just said, we're going to keep coming back year after year after year after year, and you're never going to be able to stop talking about this. Or you have this opportunity that all you have to do is say, okay, we're going to let the county pay for it, and it's not your money. And it wasn't a landslide, right? It passed by a couple of votes, but it was enough to tip the balance. And again, the batting average of the Twins owners, Carl Pohlad, I think it started under Calvin Griffith, was at best 100. But once you win that one time, you've got your money and you've got your stadium. So there are I feel like there are no permanent wins. There are only temporary wins. I'm wearing my Save Tiger Stadium sweatshirt, which is a great memento of the Tiger Stadium fan club, which successfully fought from 1987 until the late 90s to keep Detroit from tearing down Tiger Stadium and building a new one. And as we all know, that was as far as they won, and eventually they lost the one time. And now, we have Comerica Park, and Detroit has all the debt for Comerica Park. So it's hard to point to a lot of successes because, it's only a success until it's a failure.
So with regards to legislation, which you had brought up earlier, we had a podcast where we actually ran across a piece of legislation as a result of the Browns moving to Baltimore. So after the Browns moved to Baltimore, the state of Ohio passed a bill which basically said that any team playing in a public stadium that wants to move, and I'm probably getting this slightly wrong, but any team that wants to move has to give the opportunity for local ownership to purchase the team, something to that effect.
Yeah.
And it sounds kind of airy-fairy and, a whole lot of who cares. However, it seemed to work with the Columbus Crew.
Right.
Because they were ready to go. The owner had already cut a deal with Austin, Texas, and he was going. And rumor has it that when the state got involved and said, hey, we've got this piece of legislation that says you can't do this, we're going to go to court. The commissioner of Major League Soccer was fielding calls from the commissioner of the NFL, the commissioner of Major League Baseball, and all these other leagues to say, hey, we don't even want to test this. Is there anywhere else where that this kind of legislation exists? Do you think it holds up if it gets put to the test?
I mean, we don't know, right? Because the Ohio one wasn't put to the test either, right? It was more a question of they didn't want to risk it. I can't think of anywhere that has actually tested that. Usually leagues like to not move teams just because, it's a proven market. So they will try and find a local option. And again, unless the owner doesn't want to sell, right? And it's just like, I'm up and moving. The one example I can think of in terms of sort of having some fine print in place that you don't know how it's going to work out, but turns out doing great is St. Louis with the Rams, right? Where the Rams, Stan Kroenke had all the leverage, right? He had a lease that he had gotten St. Louis to agree to that basically let him break it as long as St. Louis had not, was not keeping the stadium in state-of-the-art condition, which was, an impossible bar to meet because it basically was like it has to constantly be as good as all the new ones.
Is that dubious definition at best?
Yeah, no, it was something like, in line with the top 25 or 33% of NFL stadiums. And all he needed to do was just, enact that and then, get the league's approval to move to LA. And he skipped a part, right? Which was that the NFL bylaws had in there that they have to make an effort to keep the team in its existing market. And again, that's very hazy. And, there's all sorts of different ways they can play it. And the NFL, I'm sure, was like, oh, we could just say we wanted to keep the team. Unfortunately for the NFL and for, Kroenke, the city of St. Louis went to court and won a whole lot of money. So it's always good to have those clauses in there, and it's always good to have local officials who are willing to try to do something about them. Unfortunately, it's usually after the team has left or has tried to leave, right? If the Crew had not been up and moving to Austin, right? Then I'm sure that Columbus and Ohio would not have been like wanting to alienate the owners by saying, well, we're going to sue you if you do this. But, I mean, there's all sorts of close calls, right? I mean, the Colts almost didn't move to Indianapolis if the state legislature had gotten their act together to declare eminent domain on the team a little bit sooner before the moving vans were all packed up. So there's all sorts of weird legal, gamesmanship that can go on. And it's always good to have smart people, in the state legislature and in the city government, and people who are willing to try to, play hardball. And I think, going back to the A's, I think the mayor of Oakland has done a pretty good job of trying to understand that she has some leverage in this deal, which a lot of cities do not. A lot of them are just like, going back again to the Expos when they moved to Washington, and the story was that the mayor of Williams, I think it was, in DC, came in and said to Jerry Reinsdorf, who was the White Sox owner, right, who's the head of the relocation committee. Well, we were thinking about a 2/3, 1/3 split in terms of the public-private cost, and Jerry Reinsdorf reportedly said, "Oh, we were thinking more 3/3, no thirds." And the mayor of DC did not tell him to get out of his office. He said, "Oh, okay, well, let's talk then." And that, unfortunately, is the more typical way that elected officials respond to this stuff.
Your story there about St. Louis really makes me appreciate the power play that Robert Kraft made back in the 90s.
Oh, man.
When he enforced his leases and basically forbade the Patriots from moving to St. Louis.
All right. So which part are we talking about? Because it was the whole Hartford thing.
Oh, no, this is before then.
Before
he owned them. Basically, he had piecemeal over the years bought up all the parking lots, all the properties, and the stadium.
Oh, okay, yeah.
Foxborough Stadium. And part of the lease that the Patriots had with that was that they could not move without, I guess, the stadium ownership approval or something to that effect. So when James Orthwein wanted to move the Patriots to St. Louis, he said, nope, right here in the contract, you can't. Basically forced his hand.
I was thinking of his later gambit, which was when,
Yeah.
was when he basically said, we're moving to Hartford. Somewhere I still have the issue of the Hartford Courant with on the front page, it just says touchdown in giant lettering, and use that as a way to get the NFL to approve the G3 fund to help pay for stadiums for teams in the top 6 markets. Guess what the 6th largest market in the NFL was in 1999 or whatever it was? That would be Boston. And he managed to play it very smart. So, and again, didn't want to move, managed to get the money and stay where he wanted to be. He didn't want to be in Hartford.
No, not at all. Not at all. That was doomed from the start. It was apparent to everybody.
It was not doomed to the Hartford Courant or John Rowland, the governor of Connecticut.
And you mentioned John Rowland's name, and people will still curse him for that deal to this day. You're also mentioning like for the Orioles, for example, part of the money being sunk into their stadium and into the Ravens stadium is for like a ballpark village kind of thing to go up. I think about like when Robert Kraft started that around Gillette Stadium, people thought he was nuts, but that's kind of become standard operating procedure for all the new complexes going up now.
Yeah, kind of. I think got invented in stages, right? I mean, you had like the Sky Dome, right, which was the first ballpark where it was like it's not just a baseball stadium; it's also a Hard Rock Cafe and a hotel,
and a McDonald's. Yes.
Yeah. And then you had Camden Yards, which has the warehouse and has Utah Street and has all that shopping alongside it. Which then begat, the Red Sox taking over Yawkey Way, which is not technically part of the ballpark, but really effectively is because they own all the, rights to have vendors along there. So yeah, it's definitely been a trend over the last 30 years, increasing trend of like, we want not just the money from selling tickets, but from anything else we can sell inside the ballpark or just outside the ballpark. And now everybody's pointing to the Battery, the thing the Braves have in Cobb County, and saying, well, we also want, a whole development that we can do of housing and other stuff like that, which, I don't think is particularly because it's better economically for the ballpark or better economically, either way, you have more stuff under your control, right? The more stuff you own, the more ways you can make money by selling things. So yeah, I'm not surprised that we're seeing that, right now in Virginia, right, with the Caps and the Wizards are talking about, right? Alexandria, Virginia. We're gonna. Are you from the DC area?
I originally from Philadelphia, moved to the DC area, and no, please no. I can't even put words into what a cluster that is going to be. If it comes through and what they're asking,
but Atlanta, right? I mean, it seemed every bit as stupid to build it in Cobb County, and it probably was every bit as stupid to build it in Cobb County, right? I mean, aside from how it maybe has worked out as well as could be expected, I mean, that's ridiculous for that there. But like, I agree with you. I mean, trying to get 20,000 people to Alexandria on a weeknight is insane.
Entire time I lived in the immediate area to the DC Metro, and I don't live there anymore, so screw it. It was in Woodbridge, and they had the Potomac Nationals, and I think the first 8 of the 12 years I lived there, they were trying to get another stadium for them near the Wegmans, and how many years that went back and forth and fell apart. And well, my now wife explained to me Disney America that was going to go in there and what a cluster that was. And I'm just comparing the two situations to where Disney America never got built and it was a devious back and forth, to when the Potomac Nationals moved to Fredericksburg. Yeah. And I'm like, I don't see how this is going to work. I just don't see how it's going to work. And then of course I say, well, just put a new arena where RFK is, and then it's like, well, that's a whole other ball of wax. And it's I don't know. I happen to like that arena where the Capitals play as it is, and they're gonna. He's really trying hard to lose that. I don't know.
But again, I mean, as I think we're all clear here, but hopefully everybody listening to this is clear. None of these things are getting built because there's something wrong with the old stadium, right?
Right? No.
If it were because of that, then the first stadium to be knocked down would have been probably Olympic Stadium, and it's still there, and they're rebuilding it, right?
There's an announcement. There's an announcement coming tomorrow, and I think it's that they're going to replace the roof.
Yes, no, they're going to spend, I think it's $700 million or something Canadian, so it's really only like $650 million American. But I mean, it's not none of these things. It has nothing to do with whether the old place is amazing or terrible or some combination of amazing or terrible, and you can have a situation like Fenway Park where it went from one owner saying it's completely obsolete, there's no possible way we can stay, to a new owner saying, no, this is the best thing ever, we're going to rebuild it, renovate it and keep it much the way it is. So none of this has to do with whether it's any good. My favorite stat, I think, still from the book is the fact that the farthest seat from the field at Old Comiskey Park was closer to the field than the closest upper deck seat at New Comiskey Park. Now, whatever field, right? So there's no, it had nothing, and they kept saying, "Oh, we want to build a new, park with better sight lines." And I mean, the new park doesn't have pillars. That's true, but instead of having 20 people or something like that sitting behind pillars on days when the White Sox happen to sell out, you have nobody sitting behind pillars, but nobody wants to sit in the entire upper deck because it's 10 miles from the field. Yeah. Same thing with, really it's same thing with all the new stadiums and arenas that were replaced, ones that were built before the 70s, I want to say, even some place like the Mets, Shea Stadium, which was not particularly intimate, still you were closer to the field than you were at Citi Field. And I happen to like Citi Field fine, but the 40,000th seat there is definitely further than the 40,000th seat was Shea.
I find the situation in Chicago to be fascinating, frustrating. I don't know, one of the two. I mean, right off the top, if I'm a politician in Chicago and the owner of the White Sox is coming to me with his hat in hand, I'm laughing him out of the building because I don't have to worry about losing Major League Baseball. Right, in the city of Chicago. I mean, you go take your team to wherever, Omaha or, Nunavut or wherever you want to take them. Like the Cubs are staying in Chicago, and
they would need a dome there.
They probably would, and some people maybe.
And let's be real. This is the 2024 White Sox we're talking about. You're not talking about losing Major League Baseball anyway.
Yeah, maybe. And then the other one is the Bears, who are threatening to move out to the suburbs. And I'm like, well, you know what? Like, if you're the city of Chicago, suddenly you got to figure out what to do with Soldier Field, I guess. But, I mean, is it that big a deal if they move out there? Like, the soccer team just moved back from the suburbs because people thought it sucked. So, go ahead. Go move out to the suburbs if you like. Whatever. Like, I don't understand how there's even a conversation with some of these city officials and the owners of these teams. It's got to be kickbacks.
Yeah, no, it's not kickbacks. That's the thing.
I said that in just so I don't get sued. I was just kidding.
Yeah. I'm just so I don't know, 12, 13 years ago, something like that. I did an article for the Nation magazine called why do mayors love sports stadiums? Dave Zirin, who I don't know if you guys know, who's a writer and a journalist, was doing a special issue, sports issue of the Nation. He was like, "Oh, write something about stadiums." So I was like, "All right, let me just try and figure out like what the real reasons are." And I spent a lot of time talking to folks. And I spent a lot of time trying to really drill down to what is the secret here. And you want to think, oh, they're worried about their campaign donations. They're not really worried about that. They're worried about looking bad if the team leaves and that they get voted out of office. Can anybody here name the number of mayors who have been voted out of office after their team lost a sports team?
Oh, I saw this on another video. It's one.
Yeah, it's one. It's the guy from Greg Nichols, I think it was in Seattle when the Sonics left. And when I talked to my friends in Seattle, they're all like, yeah, that didn't help. But mostly it was that it snowed that right before the election and he didn't shovel. So that was, but so it's not that, right? And I think it really is that, the more people I talk to, and there's a great book by a couple of academics from Philadelphia called Public Dollars, Private Stadiums, looking at like which cities have, sort of greased the skids for these deals. And I really think it's a couple of things. One is that if you're mayor, if the entire like political and business establishment is saying, you got to get this done, you got to get this done, you got to find a way to get this done. Everybody at the parties you're going to is saying this. You may not like it, but you're thinking, okay, how can I find a way to get this done that I can live with? And then on top of that, despite the fact that, it's impossible to find an economist who does not think that these things are terrible deals for the public, right? I mean, like literally impossible, except for the couple who take contracts to work for teams to say what the teams want them to say.
We can talk about Worcester if you want.
Yeah, we can definitely talk about Worcester. But despite that, you've got these consulting reports, right, that say, oh, but it'll create this many jobs, it'll create this much economic activity. And the numbers are completely made up, but it's covered, right? It's the mayor can say, well, they tell me it's going to create 30,000 jobs. And some people say no, but other people say yes. So, it's probably somewhere in the middle. So this is probably going to be worth it, And again, it varies mayor to mayor. You can never predict, I mean, like a lot of people I know in Chicago thought that the current mayor, when he came in, was going to really play hardball with the Bears and the White Sox, and that seems not to be the case. And on the other hand, you had weird random people like Tom Tate, the mayor of Anaheim for a long time, who was, not particularly, I don't think he had particular ideological axe to grind or reason to oppose spending. He was just a business guy who was like, oh, I want to see why these numbers work out, and managed to hold off the Angels for like a good decade from building a stadium. And then the guy who came afterwards ended up being under FBI investigation for taking bribes for the stadium deal. So that collapsed as well. You want your happy ending? The Angels, nobody has to give money to Artie Moreno. And
it's a Field of Schemes staple. The exposing of the team-friendly economist who has no degree in economics, who knows nothing about economics.
Yeah,
it seems to be a common theme in the Field of Schemes articles.
I can't take credit for this one. A friend of mine who used to work for an economic consulting firm, writing up reports, explained them to me by saying, it's just like that old Calvin and Hobbes cartoon where Calvin's writing a paper about bats and he doesn't want to do any research, so he titles it "Bats Are Bugs," and Hobbes is like, I don't know if that's right. He's like, no, it'll be great. I've got something that will guarantee me an A. I've got a clear plastic binder to put my report in. And it didn't work out very well for Calvin, but if Calvin went into economic consulting, he would have done much better, right? Because, that's really what it is. It's just, we're going to come up with 250-page PDF, with full color illustrations and all this stuff that looks great and is based on absolutely nothing. And is probably some guy with a hotel management degree who wrote it at best. And, it doesn't matter if it's true, right? It looks really good. And again, people are going to say what they say against it regardless, but at least you can say, oh, look at the pretty pictures. If you look at the charts, we've got charts. It must be worth something. So there's that. And then there's, of course, as you guys hinted at with Worcester, there's Andy Zimbalist, who was one of the people who, was absolutely an inspiration for us, a great help for us in writing the book. And, he and, had co-written a book on sports jobs and taxes right before we did, talking about the economics of it. And we cited it a lot. And, he was one of the people who was working to found a third major league when the majors were on strike, try to, be a competitor. And, somewhere along the way, he started taking, money from pretty much anybody to write up reports on behalf of their deal. At one point, he got in trouble because, I'm trying to remember the details. I think it was he had done something for Anaheim when they were trying to keep the Ducks, saying that the Ducks were a huge benefit, to the local economy. And then he was hired by Seattle to say that, say the exact opposite. Basically, we wrote the report saying not, it's the same wording, but he just changed everything to the opposite conclusion. And then ended up working for the Worcester Red Sox to try and justify their thing. And, he still talks to me, I still get to ask him about it, and he's still cordial, at least. But I think, he's blown some of his cred with the economics community for, kind of saying, I don't think he's ever lied, but I think he's certainly bent his conclusions to say, well, like in Worcester, well, the stadium isn't going to do anything, but all this housing around it, that might be a benefit. And he's not a housing economist, but, he went out there and sort of said, well, maybe. Did the same thing with the Nets, right? When the Nets were moving to Brooklyn, it was like, oh, there's all going to be all this housing that comes with it. That'll be a great benefit. He didn't say that'll be a great benefit. He said that could be a great benefit, right? It's the old journalist trick of when you can't actually say something definitively, put a question mark at the end of the headline. Could stadium be worth $1 billion in benefits?
Good.
Who can say?
Yeah, I worked for the Paw Sox for 12 years, and I left before the whole transition came out. And I remember we did a podcast just ripping the deal. I mean, if I owned the Paw Sox, I would have taken the deal too. No questions asked. But then I heard from everybody I knew who still was there saying, no, you're wrong. This is going to be great for all of us, and it's going to bring in so much money to the state. And none of them could tell me exactly how, except for, the player salary. Look at all the taxes they're going to be paying. And within a year, they were all laid off. So,
oh man,
none of them made the move from Pawtucket to Worcester. So wow. I was like, oh, sorry guys. But
so, since you began this journey, this slightly cynical journey over decades, I guess, how has that affected your own fandom? Like, have you found it more difficult to sit in a stadium and watch a game, or watch on television, or?
A little bit. I mean, part of it is, I think, would have been the case even if I weren't writing about this and studying it, just because, especially with baseball, some of my biggest attachment to it was the history in the stadiums, right? When I was in college, a friend of mine and I took a road trip where we went to Tiger Stadium, Comiskey, the old Cleveland Stadium, and Memorial Stadium in Baltimore. And it was just amazing, it was my first time at Tiger Stadium, and, I'm sitting there and I'm like, Ty Cobb played there, and it really felt, like every place we went felt like a destination. It felt like it had so much history and so much character. Whereas now, if you did the same trip, there would be some, this place is designed a little bit differently from that one, but it feels like, different variations on the same model. So that certainly has I've lost some of my innocence, I guess, around sports, but I don't know if I ever really had that much, I mean, because I grew up with teams threatening to move and teams, doing horrible things. One of the formative events of my childhood was Tom Seaver being traded by the Mets because, they didn't want to pay him enough money. So I was already pretty cynical, I have to say. And I'm still a fan, I still go to plenty of baseball games. I, have adopted soccer as a new sport since my son was really into it. I went to a WNBA game this year for the first time in a while, and that was fun, even though it was at the Brooklyn Arena, which is absolutely one of the most horrible places on earth. So yeah, I mean, it hasn't helped, right? Because I guess the short answer is it's hard for anybody to be a sports fan right now. It's really expensive. The experience is way more about selling you stuff than about watching the game. There was an economist from Illinois, Alan Sanderson, who
this a real economist?
Real economist.
Okay.
He's the guy who said if you're going to instead of taking money and spending on a sports stadium, you'd be better off taking it up in a helicopter over your city and in a paper bag and throwing it out the window over your city. He told me about how he was talking to a marketing guy, and the guy was complaining about, you go to games these days and it's just about like the ads and the stuff going on around it, and it's like nobody ever watches and the guy said, Alan, we have different categories, and you're what we call a traditional fan. You go there to watch the game. Let me tell you, there aren't that many of you. So, but I mean, again, if you're going to be a sports fan in the year 2024, I think it kind of behooves you to be more into the spectacle, right? And the
how many times have I on this podcast crapped on Mark and his people going and spending $25-$30 to stand in a bar at the top of the stratosphere where the ball game's going on and pay like $15 to $18 a beer. That makes no sense. Why do that?
I briefly wanted to write a treatise called a guide to sneaking down, which would have been interviewing people about the best ways to sit in seats that you didn't actually pay for. And the two problems with it that I realized were, one, it's kind of not possible anymore because there's just so much more security than there was when, even 20, 30 years ago. And the other is the problem that I would give away all the secrets. And then
right.
So, but if anybody wants to start like a secret, listserv or something like that, sharing tips on how to sit in the good seats without actually paying for them, then I'm down with that.
Absolutely.
Well,
go ahead,
Dave. That part of the future, like the good seats are going to be like super duper amazeballs and there's fewer seats.
Right, there just won't be bad seats.
So like there'll be like the Taylor Swift seats, and then the rich people will get kind of like the lower upper deck, and the middle class will be on the outside looking in.
We'll be home watching it on TV.
Or the rich people will be down by the field, and the middle class will be at a bar somewhere that they can like go and stand and look at the field every once in a while and then go back to the bar and sort of
like Mark and his millennials.
Don't say millennials. I don't do that crap. Don't you dare.
Millennial Dan?
Yeah.
Him and his Gen Zs.
Yeah,
Gen Zs are they're a little young for the bars.
Yeah.
Oh, Neil, I think we could probably
anything.
talk all night about this topic, but we don't want to keep you all night. So this might be a good place to stop our conversation for now, for part one. We should maybe.
There you go. I'm sure
I have one question that I want to get in before we go.
Do it.
So one of the things that we do at Stadium Journey, and I don't want to sound I don't want to sound overly self-righteous or self-promoting or whatever, but one of the things we do is we rank. So we'll take a league and we'll rank from 1 to 30 or 1 to 32 or whatever.
And
how much
never
do you think,
get it right?
Yeah, no. How much do you think that idea plays into the whole thing? Because we've done a bunch of podcasts where we rank from top to bottom, and we're at like number 29. This is the 29th best stadium in this league, and we're like, yeah, this is a really good stadium. This is all right. We're pretty happy about it. But these people are competitive and they want to keep up, and they,
I mean, yeah.
Not that major league owners are looking at stadium journey, but just the idea that, my stadium is not as good as the one in Chicago and the one in Boston and the one in Pittsburgh and the one and we need to move up. We're a higher class city than that.
I get what you're saying, and I think they probably do. If a ranking comes out and they're 29th or 26th or whatever, probably aren't happy about it. But this was going on, way before there were rankings of things on the internet, right? When the Dodgers moved to Los Angeles, it was like, the New York Herald Tribune had come up with a ranking of stadiums nationwide. So I think they're going to do it, regardless, and are going to, use it as an argument. There's plenty of look the Royals, right? Kauffman Stadium is constantly at the top of all those rankings, right? Everybody loves Kauffman Stadium, and they're still like, oh no, we need a new place. So again, I think you're you can be absolved. Your conscience can be clean. That it's not. This is not all the result of rankings on a podcast.
Are you trying to blame us for the A's moving to Vegas, Dave?
Yeah, totally. It's all me.
They are always 29 or 30.
No, if I was going to move them, I'd move them to Montreal.
Next time I'm on, I'm going to make my defense of the Oakland Coliseum because I got one.
Oh, okay.
It's a longer conversation than we.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. There you go. There's a part two right there.
There's a part two. So, Neil, before we let you go, do you want to pump up your site and your social media presence if any of our listeners would like to follow you there?
Absolutely. So it's all the exact same place, right? So fieldofschemes.com, Field of Schemes on Twitter, Field of Schemes on Facebook, Field of Schemes on Blue Sky, on Mastodon, on what's the other one? Post.news. We've got an Instagram that I have to get back to posting to called Vaportecture, which is about stadium designs that never actually come to fruition. Any way you want to follow it is fine. And I'm, like I said, I'm there every day for some reason, constantly reporting on the latest this, because I guess I, feel like I got in at the start and I have to see how it turns out.
Well, that's awesome. Well, thank you so much for joining us, Neil. It was a pleasure.
Thanks for having me.
Hey, so thanks everybody for joining us. Dan, where can our listeners follow you online?
DanLaw83. When I'm unbanned.
The band hammer.
Man, they nailed me. It's funny is this, I'm not going to go too much into it. This guy retweeted a tweet I tweeted about him. That was hard to say. About what a terrible person he is. And I forgot that a tweet before that, I had mentioned that I wanted him to not get seriously hurt, but just a shot to the throat, with the hand.
The old throat punch?
And the old throat punch. And that I got banned for 4 days later. Huh. The other tweet he wanted gone is still there. And I'm ignoring his chuds because I don't care. Where'd Mark go?
Chuds? So Chuds, Dan Law 83.
Chuds, yeah. Dan Law, I'll be unbanned Wednesday afternoon. You can find Ballpark Hunter at Mark Viquez.
There you go. Thank you.
Mark had
to skip out, so Ballpark Hunter, his stuff. Dave, you got any stadium journeys planned for the next couple of weeks? And where can our listeners follow along?
I do. Bucket list item for me. So I think last time we were here, I said there's a trifecta of rivalry hockey games in the OUA, and I got into 2 of them. So the Frosty Mug is one, Battle of Waterloo at the Odd is the other one. And then the third one is actually the oldest rivalry in hockey history. And that is Queens against RMC. The very first time they played was on the frozen bay in Kingston, Ontario. So they play now. RMC is a military college with an enrollment of 1,100. The entire school shows up at this game.
I think they'd fall through the ice.
So no, well, they don't play on the ice. They don't play on the bay anymore.
That's not how that works.
In the OHL arena where the Frontenacs play, and it's called the Carr Harris Cup. So, seeing as my schedule is a little bit more flexible this year, I am going to be at the Carr Harris Cup for the first time. So I'm super excited about that. I got some Guelph Griffins basketball coming up. A bunch of reviews to do. KW Siskins, I'm going to try. I have never seen them before. That's Junior B. I got some Junior C, Hespler Shamrocks, Wellesley Applejacks, and I have to take my rain check from Stainer.
There's a team called the Applejacks?
Yes, man, because they have the Apple, they have the Wellesley Apple Festival there.
Nice.
So yeah, I have to use my rain check for the Stainer Siskins. So if you saw my social media post from that game, you saw a broken Zamboni on the ice. So I got to get my money's worth out of that one. So you can follow all those adventures. Super busy couple weeks at ProFan9.
Indeed. I loved your line when you posted the. You should have posted the comment you made to me. In private to that post, because you said there's probably 20 guys in the stands who could fix this Zamboni, but instead they're canceling the game.
Yeah, Stainer being a bit of a farm community. Yeah. Problem is like normally they throw another Zamboni on a truck, but you got to go all the way to Collingwood or to Wasaga Beach, and they got their own games going on, and it's not like finding another hockey rink in the city. So
the damn Zamboni shortage in Canada,
and it was cold. I sat and froze my butt off for nothing.
All right, so that's all at ProFan9, and let's see, where am I going the next couple of weeks? I got a lot of PA announcing to go. It's senior days coming up, so I'm announcing some senior day festivities at UMass Dartmouth, men's basketball, women's basketball, hockey. I'm doing senior day for Brown women's hockey next weekend. I think that's plenty to keep me busy. I may hit the Beanpot finals next week. I don't know. Beanpot semis are going on right now as we're recording, and Northeastern won game 1 and BU's winning game 2. So looks like that could be the matchup next Monday. You can follow me if I'm not sure where I'm going, and you really care. Follow me on Twitter or Instagram at PuckmanRI. And remember, StadiumJourney.com is where you can find all of our 2,500 stadium reviews, news item, and other feature stories. Connect with us on social media channels at Stadium Journey. Like, share, follow. Audio versions of the Stadium Journey podcast. Search HIAC Talk Radio Network wherever you look for your favorite podcast. We'll show up there. And if you'd rather watch the podcast, video simulcast can be found on Stadium Journey's YouTube page. And if you want to be part of our live studio audience, join us for our live streams every other Monday night at 7 Eastern at, what is it, Dan? Twitch? I don't know what the address is.
Just look up DanLow83 on Twitch, Kick, YouTube, Twitter, or Facebook.
All right. Multi-streaming platform.
Yeah, and I'm never going to stop it again.
All right.
It's going to stay that way this time.
We'll be back in 2 weeks, February 19th. And I don't think we have a topic determined at this time, so stay tuned. And as always, thanks everyone for your support. Thanks to Neil deMause for joining us tonight. He was a bucket list guest for us. Glad we got him on the show. So for Dan, Mark, and Dave, this is Paul wishing you all safe stadium journeys and close games. Be careful out there.
Or don't.